afternoon. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you today. This is an incredible turnout. My thanks to the team at PHINMA Education for inviting me to the forum. As you saw, my name is Kavita, and I am here representing the Global Schools Forum, a collaborative community of non-state organizations working to improve education at scale for underserved children. If I can move to the next slide, please. The genesis of GSF came from the fact that more and more children across the world are attending non-state schools, a term that we use to refer to community schools, faith-based institutions, affordable or low-fee private schools, and other private education players. While looking at this sector, what we found was that the non-state education sector is highly fragmented and that organizations are often working in isolation. There were no platforms or networks bringing together education providers to connect with each other, to share and learn from best practice, build evidence of what works, and deepen impact on children. Since our inception in 2017, and since we sent my bio, we've actually grown to a network of 78 organizations working across 53 countries, running or supporting nearly 55,000 schools and impacting over 7.5 million children. So as I share my thoughts with you today, I bring with me experiences from the Global Schools Forum's community of organizations, as well as from my own grounding and experience of education in government and non-state schools in India, an education system with nearly 1.5 million schools educating over 265 million children. That's the scale of what we're dealing with in India. My intention today is not to provide solutions to the education crisis, especially at the foundational level, but instead I'm going to shine light on where we stand now, give you examples of governments and non-state organizations attempting to change the status quo, lay out some pathways forward, and provide some insights into what we can all collectively do to better provide access, equity, and quality of education for all children. So let me start with this, and I think you saw bits of this in the videos that were playing, but the learning crisis is real and it is enormous. The next slide, please. The World Bank defines learning poverty as the share of children who cannot read a simple text with comprehension by age 10. Pre-pandemic, it was estimated that the learning poverty in low and middle income countries was 57%. That meant 6 out of 10 children could not read with comprehension. Since the onset of COVID-19, and the resulting school closures of almost 2 years in many countries, the learning poverty index has risen to a global average of 70%. In the Philippines, I believe that number is 90%. So these numbers are staggering. So this statistic about learning poverty is particularly important given that without foundational learning, young people will complete school with lower skill levels that will impact their future productivity and earnings, potentially $21 trillion in lifetime earnings. The ripple effects of this learning poverty impacts every layer of our society and of our economies. Now let me layer this with data on where children are going to school. In the past 2 decades, there has been a significant shift in the number of children attending private or non-state schools. Today, the private sector, made up of a fairly heterogeneous mix of actors, educates nearly 380 million children globally. From 2000 to 2019, we have seen enrollment in primary education go from 10 to 17%. The non-state sector plays a significantly larger role in 2 areas. Nearly 26% of learners in secondary education attend a non-state school, so that's 1 in 4 children, and nearly 46% of enrollment of children under the age of 3 in middle-income countries was in private early education centers. This number is nearly 55% in East and Southeast Asia. It's therefore undeniable that the private non-state sector has a role to play in bridging the education gap and must be harnessed towards a broader education change. So where can the non-state sector contribute the most? I'm going to talk about it in three ways. The first is in the provision of equitable access to education. Despite strong government push for universal primary education, access to schooling across many countries varies by demographics. The non-state education sector can help children and young people access education in a few ways. First, the non-state can often reach the most marginalized and the most remote. In Guatemala, for example, a country in Latin America, the challenges for girls from indigenous communities are immense. Fewer than 20% of indigenous girls graduate from high school. Poverty rate among indigenous women is 66%, and 57% of women in those communities are mothers by age 20. So to provide a solution to this problem, one of GSF's members, Maya Impact, works with Mayan girls in Guatemala, providing much needed secondary education to this community. This is an example of an organization working with a specific group of young people that the government system is unable to access. Non-state actors are also extremely agile and can mobilize quickly in times of crisis and emergency. Organizations like BRAC in Bangladesh and Street Child have been able to quickly organize education for children in informal settlements, refugee camps, and in conflict situations like the war in Ukraine. They are the first boots-on-the-ground providers of education in times of crisis. Non-state organizations can also partner with governments to bridge the gap in access. In 2009, the Sindh provincial government in Pakistan launched a program promoting low-cost private schooling in rural Sindh, aimed at expanding access to primary school in underserved rural communities. An evaluation of the program showed that vouchers increased enrollment by nearly 30% in target villages. These were children that were now attending private schools in addition to government schools. So in all of these cases, including in Pakistan, it is imperative that the program design has a strong focus on equity to ensure that the most marginalized children are not left behind in underperforming schools. So that's one area in which the non-state can work. The second is that non-state actors or private players have to be vital partners to education ministries and departments, and it is crucial that governments begin to leverage the non-state sector to support the delivery of quality education. Government regulation of the private sector has typically focused on registration, on approval and licensing, on teacher certification and infrastructure. Instead, we need to shift this perspective to bring the focus on quality of education delivery and leverage non-state actors better to meet the demands of the education system. Over the past few years, we've seen different governments globally build a variety of partnership models with the private sector. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The first is in Sierra Leone in Africa, where the country launched the Education Innovation Challenge this year. It was slightly delayed because of COVID, which would see the government under the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education, donors, schools, and non-state education providers working together to improve literacy and numeracy for children in partnership schools. Through this program, a block of schools will be allocated to 5 different non-state organizations for a 3-year period, and the program places a strong emphasis on the ongoing collection of data to ensure that children are learning. In another example, PEAS, a network of secondary schools working across Uganda and Zambia, partnered with the Ugandan government's Directorate of Education Standards to design and implement the Inspect and Improve program. The program leveraged the Directorate's inspection approach and PEAS's own school management expertise to support school leaders to make improvements. A study of the program found that there were changes to the quality of teaching and learning, with more teachers preparing lesson plans and learner-centered activities, improvement in student well-being, and a shift to a whole school improvement model. So there's incredible opportunity for the non-state and private sector to work with governments and to partner, from the more traditional school management models to technical advisories. An openness to collaboration and collective learning can lead to many more models like these in the future. And then the last place that the non-state sector can work is in the area of innovation. A report by Brookings Institution, a renowned think tank, found that 80% of education innovations originate in the non-state sector. Education innovations can help leapfrog the learning crisis, be it through the use of technology, by improving processes, or by growing and scaling their model. We've seen innovation harnessed to improve the quality of education in low-income countries. We can just stay on this previous slide, Nina. So in Kenya, Bridge International Academies has educated nearly 1 million children since their inception in 2009 and employs a highly structured and standardized approach to education, including centrally developed, highly detailed lesson plans that are delivered to teachers using tablets. A recent evaluation of Bridge's program in Kenya by Nobel Prize winning economist Michael Kramer showed that pupil learning increased by 1.35 standard deviations for pre-primary and 0.81 standard deviations for primary learners. This is one of the largest learning gains seen in international education delivered by a private provider. There is also innovation in business models to support more learners. So two of GSF's community members, Smart Start in South Africa and Kidogo in Kenya, use a model of employing mamapreneurs to set up and run small-scale women-led early childhood centers. By employing women from the communities in which these work, these innovative models have the dual purpose of providing care and education to young children, but also improving livelihoods for women. All of these examples emphasize the role of the non-state education sector in the world today. The crisis is significant, and in many countries, COVID has wiped away the hard-earned progress that we have seen in education over the past 2 decades. Instead of debating the false dichotomy of government versus private, we should be focused on how these two parts of a single education system work together better over the next few years. So here are my closing thoughts today. 1, it is time for all hands on deck. Ministries of education need to think about public and private education as one system. The children and young people in these schools are our children, and we need to pull together to ensure that every child enrolled in school receives the best quality of education we can provide and have the foundational skills needed to not just survive, but thrive. Second, nurture innovation that can scale to ensure that all children are able to access quality education. Focus on building a system that supports learners, teachers, and school leaders in a way that doesn't burden them with more. 3, data is absolutely crucial. We need better data and evidence so that practitioners and policymakers can make more informed decisions. Assessment systems that generate continuous data on a variety of factors, including student learning levels, must be used to improve instruction. Data on school performance must also be used by regulatory systems to ensure minimum standards. Data is truly the engine that can drive better education across the world. And finally, there's power in networks. There's a need to work together better and more efficiently. As we have seen at GSF, learning together and sharing what works can prevent us from recreating the wheel, avoid failures and pitfalls, and accelerate progress. There's a big challenge ahead of us, but I am confident that if the non-state education sector is harnessed more effectively, and if governments and private work together collaboratively, every child in every part of the world will get the education that they deserve. Thank you.